Good Lord, Mark. What in the world is that thing on your house? That was the first thing my neighbor George Henderson said when he shuffled across the street, clutching his morning paper, staring wide-eyed at my brand-new front door. I just smiled, rested my hand on the massive steel wheel, and gave it a slow turn until the bolts clunked into place. George, I said, this is peace of mind. Now, folks, let me back up a little, because you don't just wake up one morning and decide to bolt a bank vault door onto a suburban house. That's not in any of those DIY weekend projects books. No, this was the end result of months of harassment, one outrageous midnight break-in, and the kind of neighbor who could make the Pope cuss under his breath. When I bought this place in Willow Creek Estates, I thought I'd found paradise. Quiet cul-de-sac, mature trees, a little nature preserve out back where the chickadees flitted around my feeder. It was supposed to be the kind of spot where a man could tinker in his garage, sip coffee on the porch, and keep to himself. But what I didn't know, what no realtor will ever warn you about, was that my sanctuary came with an HOA president named Karen Whitfield. And Karen wasn't just any HOA president. She was, well, let's just say if Napoleon and Martha Stewart had a love child with a megaphone, it'd be her. She believed rules weren't guidelines, they were scripture. She believed compliance was a lifestyle, and she believed, heaven help me, that her jurisdiction extended right past my begonias, straight through my front door, and clear into my living room. Now, I'm an engineer. I like facts, measurements, things that make sense. So, when Karen started her campaign, first the flowers, then the mailbox, then the bird feeder, I tried to reason with her. I wrote letters, cited bylaws, explained the logic. Thought maybe, just maybe, she'd see reason. But Karen didn't want reason. She wanted control. And the night she secretly had my locks changed, while I was asleep inside my own house, that was the moment everything shifted. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just fighting for begonias anymore. I was fighting for the right to feel safe in my own home and friends. That's how a quiet man with a taste for logic ended up building the most ridiculous, over-engineered, absolutely glorious front door in HOA history. You ever meet somebody who just walks into a room and you know, instantly, that trouble has arrived? That was Karen Whitfield. I remember the first time I saw her. I was out front, planting those begonias she would later declare non-compliant. Sun was shining, birds were chirping, and then I heard the rumble. Not just any car, no. This was the kind of SUV so big it should have had its own zip code. Glossy white, spotless, and barreling down our narrow street like she was commanding a tank battalion. Out she came, stepping down from the driver's seat in a lemon-yellow suit so bright it could have guided aircraft. Her hair didn't move, not one strand. It was this helmet of hairspray, so rigid I swear you could have balanced a coffee cup on top. And then there was the perfume. Lord, the perfume. I caught a whiff from 15 feet away. Sweet, cloying, heavy. The kind of smell that makes you feel like you've walked face first into a department store cosmetics counter. She looked me up and down like I was some high school kid caught sneaking into the teacher's lounge. And then she smiled, tight, polite, and sharp as broken glass. Mr. Peterson, isn't it? Welcome to Willow Creek Estates. We pride ourselves on maintaining standards. Now, I didn't think much of it at first. Every neighborhood's got its character, right? Someone a little bossy, maybe a little too involved. But Karen wasn't just involved. She was the self-appointed queen of this little suburban kingdom. President of the HOA, head of every committee that mattered, the kind of woman who carried a clipboard around like it was a royal scepter. And she loved the power. You'd see her slow roll that monster SUV up and down the block, windows down, sunglasses on, scanning houses like a customs inspector at the border. Folks said she had a file on every resident, notes, photos, even color swatches of acceptable paint shades. And heaven help you if you fell outside her definition of harmony. I still remember old George Henderson warning me. He was trimming his azaleas when he leaned over the fence and said, "Son, it's easier to just give her what she wants. Karen'll wear you down till you do. That woman's like water on stone, drip, drip, drip. But I'm an engineer. My whole life has been about standing my ground, proving things with evidence, finding solutions that work. I thought I could handle Karen with logic. I thought I could show her the bylaws, point to the ambiguity, maybe even win her over with a little common sense. Turns out, Wojcik was the one thing she hated most, because Karen didn't want neighbors, she wanted subjects. And the day I realized that, well, that's when the begonias turned into a battlefield. It all started with the flowers. Now, I'm not exactly a master gardener, but I like a little color out front. So, I planted begonias, Crimson Delight to be exact, hardy, pest-resistant, cheerful little things. A couple days later, I opened my mailbox and found an envelope stamped with the official Willow Creek Estates logo, thick paper, bold font, looked like something from the IRS. Inside was a letter from Karen. Violation notice. According to her, Crimson Delight was not on the approved list of Scarlet Blaze or Ruby Radiance. I stared at that letter so long I half expected it to burst into flames. Begonias. She was citing me over begonias. I chuckled, figured it was a mistake, and wrote her a polite reply. I even included a data sheet from the nursery, pointing out the flower's pest resistance. Surely a community benefit. I thought she'd appreciate the logic. Nope, that was my first mistake. Karen didn't answer my letter. Instead, a second notice showed up. This time, a fine, $5 a day until I replaced the non-compliant flora. $5 a day for flowers. I paid the first one, under protest of course, and wrote back again, citing the bylaws. They said yards had to be maintained in a harmonious fashion. Harmonious, that was it. No list of approved plants, no color charts, no Scarlet Blaze supremacy, just harmonious. Karen didn't like that either. The fines doubled. That's when I realized this wasn't about begonias. This was about obedience. And once she knew I wouldn't roll over, the floodgates opened. Next came the mailbox. Mine was the original standard issue black box with a silver flag. Perfectly functional. But according to Karen, the board had updated the guidelines to require a brass flag. Never mind that half the street still had silver. Another letter, another fine. Then the bird feeder. I had a simple one hanging from a tree out back. Chickadees, nuthatches, the occasional cardinal. But Karen declared it attracted undesirable avian elements. Her words. Undesirable avian elements. What did she want? Bald eagles only. The letters kept coming, each one more absurd than the last. Each one escalating in tone and penalty. She started underlining words, adding exclamation points, using phrases like gross negligence of community standards. Gross negligence over a bird feeder. Now, I wasn't the only one she targeted. I heard stories up and down the block. Mrs. Rodriguez got cited for wind chimes that were audibly disruptive. The Martins down the way were fined because their garage door paint had faded half a shade, but most folks just sighed, grumbled, and wrote the check. They didn't want the hassle. Old George shook his head and told me, "Son, it's easier to plant the red one, trust me. You'll never win against Karen." But I couldn't, not this time. See, I'm built a little differently. I deal with facts, specs, measurements. If the bylaws said one thing, that's what they meant. And I wasn't about to let someone steamroll me with her own made-up version of reality. So, every time Karen sent me a letter, I sent one back. Calm, polite, filled with references and footnotes. I practically memorized the 300-page HOA handbook. I'd highlight contradictions, point out clauses she'd overlooked, and send copies to the entire board. And every time I did, I could almost hear her grinding her teeth from across the street. It became a battle of wills. Her, inventing new rules out of thin air. Me, dissecting them with engineer's precision. And let me tell you, folks, this little suburban skirmish was about to turn into an all-out war. Because if begonias and mailboxes drove Karen crazy, just wait until you hear what she tried next. It happened on a Tuesday night. Quiet, ordinary, nothing special. I'd been up late tinkering in the garage, lost track of time, as usual. Around midnight, I finally headed inside, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the kitchen table. That's when I heard it. A faint clink, clink, clink at the front door. At first, I thought maybe it was the wind, but no, this was deliberate. Metal on metal. My heart thudded as I set the glass down and walked to the foyer. The porch light was off, so I eased the curtain back just a crack. There he was. A man crouched at my front door, tool belt slung low, flashlight wedged under his arm. A locksmith. At midnight. And parked at the curb, idling under the street lamp, was a massive white SUV. You guessed it, Karen's battleship on wheels. My first thought was to fling open the door, catch them in the act. But then I realized, if they were changing the lock, opening that door would leave me standing in the dark with a half-installed deadbolt and no way to secure it. So I stayed quiet, watching, pulse hammering in my ears. The locksmith worked fast, too fast. He had the old lock out in minutes, replaced with a shiny new one. He scribbled something on a clipboard, handed it through the SUV window. Then both vehicles pulled away, silent as thieves. I stood there frozen, barely breathing. I must have stayed by that door for 15 minutes, staring at the knob, half expecting it to twist on its own. Finally, I locked up every other door, double-checked the windows, and sat in a chair by the entryway until dawn. Morning came. Sunlight made everything seem almost normal, until I tried my key. It slid into the lock just fine, but wouldn't turn. I tried again, harder, nothing. Cold dread ran through me. I jogged to the back door, same thing. My keys were useless. I waved George Henderson over. He shuffled across, concern on his face. When he tried his spare key, the one I'd given him for emergencies, it didn't work either. "That's mighty peculiar," he muttered. Then he hesitated, scratching his head. "Well, I did see a locksmith van out front, day before yesterday. Thought maybe you called him while you were out. Karen was standing there too. Looked like she was supervising." That was it. The final piece clicked into place. Karen had changed the locks. On my house, while I was still living inside. I can't describe the cocktail of emotions that hit me all at once. Shock, fury, disbelief, even a little fear. My home, my sanctuary, violated by a woman who thought HOA bylaws gave her the right to march straight through my front door. Later that morning, when I finally got back inside with the help of an emergency locksmith, the evidence was waiting. On the hallway table, a crisp envelope with the HOA logo. Inside, a letter typed on official letterhead and signed by none other than Karen Whitfield. It claimed, pursuant to newly ratified neighborhood harmony protocols, an inspection of my property had been necessary. She wrote that access had been secured via professional locksmith after multiple failed attempts to reach me. Lies, every word. I hadn't missed a call. I hadn't received a single notice. And then, like rubbing salt into the wound, she listed the discrepancies she'd found. Guest bathroom, suboptimal color coordination, living room blinds, uninspired window treatments, entire home, a general lack of decorative elan. She even billed me for the locksmith she'd hired to break into my own home. I crumpled the letter in my fist. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't pettiness anymore. This wasn't begonias, or bird feeders, or brass mailbox flags. This was war. The first thing that hit me when I stepped inside my own house wasn't the sight. It was the smell. That perfume. Sickly sweet, heavy, clinging to the air like fog. Karen's trademark. I'd caught whiffs of it at HOA meetings, lingering long after she'd swept through the room. And now it was here, inside my home. I walked from room to room, half expecting to find drawers yanked open or papers scattered. But no, everything looked untouched. Neat, normal, except it wasn't, because I knew she'd been here. She'd stood in my hallway, sniffing around, probably judging the curtains. On the table sat her letter, bold as brass. But something else caught my eye. A water bottle, half empty, left on the porch. Not mine. Brand stamp from a locksmith company across town. I snapped a photo with my phone, slipped the bottle into a zip bag like I was working a crime scene. That's exactly what this was, a crime scene. I went over the doorframe again, closer this time. Tiny scratches around the deadbolt, the kind you'd expect when someone's rushing to change a lock at midnight. More photos. Evidence. By the time my emergency locksmith, Sam Miller, big guy, hands like baseball mitts, finished replacing the unauthorized locks, I was ready with questions. "These are brand new," he confirmed, holding up the cylinder he'd pulled out. "Standard install, maybe 2 days old, tops." I showed him the letter. His eyebrows shot up. Your HOA president had a locksmith change these at midnight? Sir, that's breaking and entering. Pure and simple. I asked him to put that in writing. He did, gladly. Sworn affidavit, signed and dated. Another piece of evidence. When he left, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pile I'd already gathered. Karen's letter, basically a written confession. The water bottle, proof of the locksmith's presence. Photos of the new locks, the scratches, the envelope on the table. Sam's affidavit. It was airtight. And the more I looked at it, the angrier I got. See, it wasn't just the trespass, it was the audacity. The sheer arrogance of thinking she could waltz into my house, critique my bathroom color scheme, and then bill me for the locksmith, like she owned the place. I thought about George's words. It's easier to plant the red ones, son. Maybe for some folks, maybe if all you want is quiet, but this wasn't quiet. This was tyranny in yoga pants and a lemon yellow suit. By the time the sun set, my shock had burned away, leaving something sharper, cold, hard determination. I wasn't just going to push back with polite letters anymore. No, I was going to build a wall she couldn't climb, a line she couldn't cross, a door she could pound on till her knuckles bled, and it still wouldn't budge. Karen thought she'd won, but she had no idea what kind of man she'd just picked a fight with. Because I wasn't just an ordinary homeowner. I was an engineer. And engineers don't break. We build. The next morning, after a night of pacing the floor and replaying that midnight break-in over and over, I picked up the phone and called the one person I knew could cut through Karen's nonsense. Carol Simmons. Carol wasn't just any lawyer. She was the kind who could turn a HOA covenant into confetti. Sharp, no nonsense, and with a dry sense of humor that made even the bleakest situations feel manageable. She'd handled my closing paperwork when I bought the house, and I remembered thinking at the time, if I ever get in real trouble, this is who I'm calling. I read her Karen's letter word for word. The neighborhood harmony protocols, the lies about multiple failed attempts to reach me, the list of so-called interior discrepancies. When I finished, there was silence on the line, then a low whistle. "Mark," she said, "do you realize what you've got here?" She admitted it, in writing. Unauthorized entry, trespass, harassment, the whole buffet of legal wrongdoing. "So, I'm not crazy," I muttered, a laugh bubbling up despite the knot in my stomach. "Crazy? No, you've got a gift. Most people beg me to prove intent. Your HOA president gift-wrapped it, signed, and stuck it on your kitchen table." Carol's plan was simple but brutal. Change every lock again. High security this time. She didn't trust Karen not to try another stunt. Document everything. Photos, affidavits, timestamps. Treat it like evidence in a criminal case. Cease and desist letter, not just to Karen, but to the entire HOA board. She'd draft something that would curl their hair, as she put it. Prepare for damages, emotional distress, invasion of privacy, legal fees. If the board didn't rein her in, they'd be on the hook too. By the time she was finished laying it out, I felt calmer, focused. After we hung up, I called another locksmith, this time one Carol recommended. He installed Medico high-security deadbolts on every exterior door. Heavy, solid, the kind of lock that laughs at cheap bump keys. And yet, even as I turned the new keys in my hand, I knew it wasn't enough. Because locks could still be picked, keys could still be copied. Karen had crossed a line once. What was stopping her from trying again? That's when the seed of an idea started to sprout. Something big, something permanent, something she couldn't possibly ignore or defeat. But before that idea could take shape, Karen came back swinging. Because if there's one thing I learned about people like her, it's this. They don't retreat. They escalate. And escalate she did. For a few days after Carol's cease and desist letter landed in Karen's mailbox, things went quiet. Too quiet. I knew better than to think she'd given up. People like Karen don't surrender. They regroup. The first strike came through the HOA's online complaint portal. Anonymous reports, though it didn't take a genius to know whose manicured fingers were typing them. One said my lawn was unevenly mowed. Another claimed there was a suspicious oil stain in my driveway. That stain? Rainwater. I checked it myself. A third accused me of placing my recycling bin 6 inches outside the designated zone. 6 inches! Each complaint it triggered an official-looking notice from the HOA, full of Karen's signature passive-aggressive phrasing. It is disheartening when certain residents disregard communal harmony. I could practically hear her voice in every sentence. I forwarded them all to Carol. She told me to keep stacking the evidence. Every ridiculous fine, every baseless citation, each one was another nail in Karen's legal coffin. But Karen wasn't satisfied with paper harassment. She needed an audience. One Saturday morning, I was in the garage organizing tools when I heard a knock. A sharp, authoritative knock. I opened the side door, and there she was, Karen herself, flanked by two board members. Gerald, the mousy accountant who always looked like he wanted to crawl into his own briefcase, and a woman I barely recognized, nodding so hard I thought her neck might snap. Karen beamed like she was hosting a game show. "Mr. Peterson, we're conducting an emergency landscape review. Concerns have been raised." "Concerns?" I asked, crossing my arms. "About what? My begonias again? Or have the chickadees staged a coup?" Gerald winced. The other woman pretended to study her clipboard. Karen's smile tightened. "We have reports of invasive plant species," she declared. "Specifically, dandelions near your rear perimeter." I stared at her. "Dandelions? You want to inspect my backyard for dandelions?" "It is the HOA's right and duty," she began. "No," I said, calm but firm. Her eyes bulged. "What do you mean, no? This is an official inspection." "This is private property," I replied. "You don't set foot in my backyard without a warrant or a court order. Not after your little locksmith stunt. Put your concerns in writing, and I'll respond in writing." Gerald looked like he wished the ground would swallow him whole. The nodder studied a loose thread on her blouse. Karen's face turned a shade of purple that clashed spectacularly with her pink jacket. "This is an outrage," she shrieked. "You are obstructing an investigation. Fines will be levied. This will go in your file." "Leave, Karen," I said, smiling just enough to twist the knife. "Carol, my lawyer, already has quite the collection of your correspondence. She finds it illuminating." The mention of Carol took some wind out of her sails. She huffed, scribbled something dramatic on her clipboard, and marched back to her SUV, Gerald scurrying after her like a chastised poodle. But I wasn't fooled. If anything, that little showdown just convinced me she'd double down. And she did. Over the next 2 weeks, the notices multiplied. Unnatural metallic sheen emanating from primary entryway, my new Medico locks. Failure to provide adequate visitor welcome due to intimidating portal structure. My front stoop, apparently too uninviting. My personal favorite, creating a neighborhood disturbance by means of overtly defensive architecture. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. But beneath the laughter, something else was growing. That seed of an idea I'd had after Carol's call, the one that whispered, "Locks aren't enough. You need more. You need something she can't touch." And the more Karen raged, the more that idea took root, because if she thought she could break into my house once, what was to stop her from trying again? No. I needed a barrier that screamed, "This far and no further." And that's when the thought crystallized. Not just a new lock, not just a stronger door, a fortress, a steel bunker door. The first time the thought crossed my mind, I actually laughed out loud. A steel bunker door, on a suburban house. Who does that? But the more Karen poked and prodded, the less crazy it sounded. See, engineers like me, we think in terms of solutions. When a bridge starts vibrating, you reinforce it. When a circuit shorts out, you redesign it. And when your HOA president decides she has the right to march through your front door at midnight, well, you build a door she can't touch. At first, I looked at heavy-duty security doors, steel cores, reinforced frames, even panic room setups. Impressive, sure, but not enough. Because Karen wasn't a burglar looking for valuables. She was worse. She was entitled. And entitlement doesn't back down easy. No, I needed something that didn't just stop her physically. I needed something that stopped her psychologically. Something that would make her stop in her tracks, tilt her head, and realize, without a word, that she'd lost. That's when the absurd idea became a plan. A bank vault door. Not like a vault door, not decorative steel. An actual multi-ton slab of reinforced metal with a wheel crank and locking bolts the size of soda cans. A door that said loud and clear, "This is my castle. Try me." I spent nights researching. security firms, safe companies, even panic room suppliers. Most thought I was joking. "Sir, is this for a high-crime area?" one salesman asked. "Only if you count an HOA president with too much perfume," I muttered. Then I found Fortress Max Security Solutions, a firm a couple states over. When I explained what I wanted, the rep didn't even blink. A grizzled ex-military guy named Marcus just said, "Sure, we can do that. You got the structure to hold it?" Music to my ears. We went over specs: 8 inches thick, hardened composite steel, multiple 1.5-inch locking bolts, classic circular crank handle, had to have that. A Sargent Greenleaf combo lock, backed up with a Medico key cylinder for everyday use. Weight? Close to 2 tons, not counting the custom steel frame. Now, installing that kind of monster wasn't a weekend project. The doorway would need reinforcement. New footings poured into the foundation, a custom steel I-beam across the top. Serious structural work. That's when I brought in Dr. Anna Sharma, a structural engineer. Quiet, methodical, sharp as a tack. At first she looked at me like I'd sprouted a second head, but once she studied my blueprints, tapped walls, ran her numbers, her skepticism turned into a raised eyebrow and the faintest smile. "Ambitious," she said finally, "but doable. With reinforcement, your frame can bear it. You'll need new footings, poured deep, and a custom I-beam. It'll be expensive, but it will hold." I nodded, grinning like a kid at Christmas. Because here's the thing. Karen had tried to take away my sense of safety. She thought she could bend me with fines, break me with letters, scare me with locksmiths, but she didn't understand. You can't scare a man who's willing to install a bank vault door on his own house. By the time I signed the contract with Fortress Max, I wasn't laughing anymore. I was dead serious. Karen wanted control? Fine. I'd give her a front door she could never, ever control, and just wait until she saw it. Once the decision was made, things moved fast. Marcus from Fortress Max sent over a contract thick enough to choke a horse. Custom fabrication, reinforced crating, specialized heavy lift transport, a 4-man crew, and a crane rental. The quote made my eyes water, but I didn't hesitate. Peace of mind and sweet, sweet revenge was worth every penny. Still, I couldn't exactly tell my neighbors, "Hey, don't mind the crane. I'm installing a bank vault in my living room." I had to be careful. Step 1 was the foundation. Dr. Sharma's plan called for deep concrete footings beneath the door jambs and a custom I-beam tied into the framing above the entry. That work alone would draw attention if I wasn't careful. So I hired a local contractor, a friend of a friend, and told him to bill it as settling repairs, which wasn't entirely false. After all, we were preventing settling of 2 tons of steel. We timed the noisiest parts of the work for Tuesday mornings, when Karen was reliably out at her Executive Women in Power networking luncheons. The rest we disguised as routine home maintenance. A cement truck parked out front, foundation repair, steel beams delivered on a flatbed, just reinforcing the porch, nothing to see here. Meanwhile, Fortress Max kept me updated on the door fabrication. 8 weeks, that's how long it would take. 8 weeks of anticipation, of Karen's continued harassment, of me biting my tongue every time I imagined her face when she saw what was coming. During those weeks, Karen didn't let up. More fines, more complaints, more letters dripping with venomous politeness. Failure to maintain adequate aesthetic charm. Evidence of non-congruous hardware. Each one forwarded straight to Carol, who added them to the growing pile of ammunition for our case. But instead of discouraging me, every envelope that showed up in my mailbox just made me smile, because Karen had no idea. Every petty jab was fuel for the fire, and when that fire finally roared to life in the form of 8 inches of solid steel, she'd be the one left speechless. I also installed a new security camera, high definition, wide angle, with audio pickup, discreetly tucked into the frame above the entryway. Carol insisted on it. If Karen so much as sneezed in the direction of my new door, I'd have proof. When Marcus called to say the door was finished and ready for transport, my heart actually skipped. This was it. Project Sanctuary, as I'd started calling it, was about to become real. All that was left was timing. The crew would arrive midweek with the door in a crate the size of a minivan. They'd need 3 days to install, weld, and calibrate everything. And if I played my cards right, Karen would come snooping just in time to see the finished masterpiece. Because, make no mistake, this wasn't just security, this was theater, and Karen Whitfield was about to get front row seats. The morning it arrived, you'd have thought I was hosting a parade. First came the flatbed truck, groaning under the weight of a crate the size of a small shed, wrapped in tarps and steel bands. Behind it rumbled a crane truck, hydraulic arms gleaming in the sun. Finally, Marcus rolled up in a black pickup with the Fortress Max logo stenciled on the side, followed by 3 men who looked like they could bench press refrigerators for fun. By 9 o'clock, half the neighborhood was watching. Mr. Henderson was on his porch in a lawn chair, coffee steaming in his hand, eyes wide as saucers. Mrs. Rodriguez had her phone out, recording like she was live streaming the Super Bowl. Curtains twitched all down the block as people peeked out. And me? I stood in the driveway, arms folded, trying not to grin like a lunatic. "All right, Mr. Peterson," Marcus said, spitting into the gravel before clapping his hands. "Let's get your front door upgraded." The crane fired up with a roar, chains clanking as they hooked the crate. Slowly, steadily, the behemoth lifted off the flatbed, dangling over my driveway like some Cold War relic. The tarps flapped, revealing glimmers of brushed steel beneath. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "What in God's name is that thing?" someone whispered. I just smiled. "Front door." They maneuvered it up and over the hedges, swinging it toward the yawning hole where my old door had been. My contractor had prepped the frame days earlier, steel I-beam anchored, fresh footings poured deep into the foundation. Still, as the vault door swung into position, my heart thudded like a drum. With a hiss of hydraulics, the crane lowered it into place. The moment the slab touched the frame, the whole house seemed to exhale. A deep thud echoed through the bones of the building, resonant and final. One of Marcus's men whistled low. "That's a beast." Over the next 3 days, the crew worked like surgeons, welding, bolting, calibrating. Sparks flew as they fused steel to steel. The crank handle was installed, polished until it gleamed. The locking bolts, 6 of them, each as thick as my wrist, slid into place with a mechanical precision that was music to my ears. Neighbors came and went, gawking, whispering, snapping photos. Delivery drivers slowed down, craning their necks. Even the UPS guy stopped mid-route, shaking his head in disbelief before muttering, "Fort Knox, huh?" By the second day, the jokes started. "Hey, Mark, you storing gold bars in there? What's the combination? Need a place to hide my bourbon from the wife. If a tornado comes through, I'm moving into your foyer." I laughed along, because that was the beauty of it. To them, it was eccentric, over the top, maybe even hilarious. But to me, it was perfect. A fortress, a line in the sand. By the 3rd day, the finishing touches went on. A graphite finish, dark, sleek, almost handsome in a brutalist way. It didn't match the neighborhood's vinyl siding and pastel shutters, but it didn't have to. It matched me. The first time I spun that massive wheel and heard the bolts chunk into place, I swear it was the most satisfying sound of my life. Like thunder, like finality. "How's it feel?" Marcus asked, wiping sweat off his forehead. "Feels like home," I said. When the crew finally packed up, neighbors applauded as if I'd just raised a monument. Henderson shook his head, muttering, "Never thought I'd see the day." Mrs. Rodriguez winked and whispered, "Wait till Karen sees this." That night, after everyone went back inside, I stood in my foyer, hand resting on the cold steel. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm, safe, like nothing, no rumor, no fine, no midnight locksmith could breach my sanctuary again. But I also knew Karen, and Karen couldn't resist. It was only a matter of time before she came marching up my driveway, clipboard in hand, lemon yellow suit blazing, ready to declare war on my new front door. And thanks to my new camera tucked discreetly above the frame, I'd have every second of it on video. So I poured a drink, sat back, and waited. Because if Karen thought begonias and brass mailbox flags were battles worth fighting, she hadn't seen anything yet. The real war was about to begin. It happened a week later, on a Tuesday morning. I was sipping coffee, scrolling through schematics for a work project, when my phone buzzed. The security app. Motion detected at the front door. I tapped the feed. And there she was. Karen Whitfield. in all her glory. Lemon yellow pantsuit, oversized sunglasses, clipboard clutched like a weapon. Gerald, the mousy accountant, trailed behind her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. They marched up my driveway with the pomp of a parade, but the second Karen reached my porch, she froze. Her head tilted. Her sunglasses slid down just enough for me to see her eyes widen. Gerald nearly bumped into her, then did a double take. There it was, my graphite-brushed, 2-ton slab of defiance. The massive circular crank handle gleaming like something out of a submarine. Karen reached out with one perfectly manicured finger, tapped the steel, and jerked her hand back like it had bitten her. "What in the Sam Hill?" she muttered. I grinned, coffee halfway to my lips. Showtime. She recovered quickly, straightening her jacket, then rapped on the door with her knuckles. The sound was dull, almost insulting. No hollow thud like a normal door. This was a wall. "Mr. Peterson," she barked. "This is President Whitfield. Open this door immediately. We are here for a scheduled compliance review." I didn't move. Let her stew. She knocked again, harder this time, then grabbed the crank handle with both hands and gave it a tug. Nothing, not even a wiggle. "Mr. Peterson!" Her voice rose an octave. "This contraption is not approved. You are in violation." That's when I hit the two-way audio. "Good morning, Karen," I said, my voice calm, amplified through the discreet speaker above the frame. "What can I do for you?" She jumped like the door itself had spoken. "Where are you?" "Open this door!" "I'm inside," I said smoothly, though in truth I was sitting in my kitchen. "And no, I will not be opening it. As I've explained before, you're not welcome here without a court order." Her face flushed crimson. "This is an outrage. This monstrosity is not an approved style. It violates every principle of neighborhood aesthetics." Section 7, subsection C, I recited. "Exterior doors must be maintained in good repair and present an aesthetically congruous appearance. This door is in excellent repair. It's brand new. And as for aesthetics, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I call it secure chic." Gerald stifled a cough, which sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Karen spun on him, hissing, then turned back to the camera. "You will remove this bunker door immediately or face fines." "Feel free to issue whatever fines you like," I said cheerfully. "Carol, my lawyer, will add them to the harassment file. In fact, I encourage you to call the police. I'd love to hear you explain to them why an HOA president needs access to a private home." That gave her pause. For a moment, I saw it, the flicker of doubt, the memory of her last stunt with the locksmith. She knew she'd gone too far, and the camera above the door was capturing every second of her meltdown. Gerald tugged at her sleeve. "Maybe we should consult legal counsel first." "This isn't over, Peterson," Karen shrieked, fists clenched. "You will rue the day you defied me." Then she spun on her heel, nearly tripping as she stomped down the steps, Gerald scurrying after her. I leaned back in my chair, laughter bubbling out of me, because in that moment, I realized the vault door hadn't just stopped Karen physically. It had broken her spell. For the first time, she looked small, petty. And thanks to Mrs. Rodriguez's ever-ready phone, I knew half the neighborhood would see the footage before the week was out. The war wasn't over. But that battle? Oh, I'd won it, in steel and silence. The showdown at my vault door spread through Willow Creek Estates faster than wildfire in a dry summer. By the next morning, Mrs. Rodriguez had already shown the video to 3 neighbors, who showed it to 3 more. Within a week, just about everyone in the subdivision had either watched it on a phone or heard the story. Karen, red-faced and shrieking at 2 tons of steel she couldn't budge. It was instant folklore. And me? I went from the guy with the begonias to Fort Knox. The pizza delivery driver called me that first. "Order for Fort Knox?" Si, he said, grinning as he handed over the box. Soon enough, the nickname stuck, but not everyone was laughing. Karen doubled down, unleashing a flurry of new finds. Unnatural metallic sheen emanating from primary entryway. Failure to provide adequate visitor welcome due to intimidating portal structure. My favorite, creating a neighborhood disturbance by means of overtly defensive architecture. I forwarded every one of them to Carol. She bundled them together and sent another letter to the HOA's lawyer, warning that each frivolous fine added to our claim for harassment. The board started to sweat. Their attorney, a weary man named Thompson, pulled them into a closed meeting and laid it out. If they kept backing Karen, they were facing not just legal fees, but personal liability. Directors' and officers' insurance wouldn't cover deliberate harassment or illegal entry. That was the crack in the dam. For the first time in years, board members began to push back. Gerald, the timid accountant, suddenly found his backbone. Others, embarrassed at having rubber-stamped Karen's antics, started asking questions. Why had fines skyrocketed? Where had HOA funds been going? What about Karen's neighborhood harmony protocols that didn't exist in any official bylaws? At the next open board meeting, residents showed up in droves. Mr. Henderson leaned on his cane, front row, while Mrs. Rodriguez passed her phone around to anyone who hadn't seen the vault door video. Laughter rippled through the room every time Karen's shrill voice echoed, "This is an outrage!" Karen tried to ram through an emergency amendment banning fortified entryways and mechanical crank-operated doors. But this time, no one seconded her motion. Her fury was palpable. She accused the board of cowardice, betrayal. Someone in the back muttered, "Or maybe we're just tired of your nonsense." Applause followed. From that moment, the writing was on the wall. Meanwhile, Carol kept tightening the screws. She filed formal demands, reimbursement for locksmith bills, the cost of my Medico locks, damages for trespass and harassment, and coverage of all legal fees. And she had the smoking gun, Karen's own letter admitting to the unauthorized lock change. The board's lawyer saw the storm coming. He urged them to settle, fast, before things reached court. And settle they did. The HOA's insurer cut a hefty check. It covered every penny I'd spent, plus damages generous enough to make even my bank vault door feel like a bargain. Most satisfying of all, as part of the settlement, Karen was required to issue a written apology to me, distributed to every homeowner. When that letter hit mailboxes, it was like Christmas morning, carefully worded, clearly drafted by a lawyer. It admitted her unauthorized actions and her failure to respect established boundaries. Not exactly heartfelt, but an apology nonetheless. A week later, Karen resigned in disgrace. By month's end, her house was on the market. Rumor had it she moved to a development with no HOA at all. The irony still makes me smile. Willow Creek Estates held a special election. Mrs. Rodriguez joined the new board, along with Gerald, apparently eager to redeem himself. They launched a full review of the 300-page bylaws, cutting the ridiculous ones and adding protections for homeowner rights. Most importantly, they made it crystal clear. The HOA had no authority to enter private residences without explicit consent or emergency cause. As for my vault door, it stayed. Too famous to touch, too symbolic to fight. Besides, as I'd always argued, it didn't actually violate any rule. If anything, it stood as a monument to boundaries, to defiance, to the day a nosy neighbor overreached and got flattened by steel. Life quieted down after that. My begonias bloomed whatever color I damn well pleased. My bird feeder attracted chickadees, cardinals, even the occasional woodpecker. And every night, when I spun that heavy wheel and heard the bolts slide home, I felt that same deep satisfaction. Sometimes, walking past my own house, I catch a glimpse of the door in the sun, that gleam of reinforced steel, and I chuckle. Did I over-engineer the solution? Absolutely. Did I make history as the only guy in suburbia with a bank vault for a front door? Probably. But was it worth it? Every penny, every strained muscle, every bewildered look from the delivery guys? Because Karen taught me something. If you don't defend your boundaries, someone like her will happily cross them. And sometimes, to defend your pièce, you have to get a little fortressy. So, that's my story, and if you're ever dealing with an out-of-control HOA, just remember, you don't have to go full bank vault, but you do have to stand your ground.